Welcome everybody to this evening's Open Eco Homes virtual tour, how we let the sunshine into our home. My name is Chris Carter and I'm going to be chairing tonight's call, and I'm being supported by my Eco Homes colleague Nicole Dan, who amongst other things will be managing the questions. And Trevor Purnell will be hosting a virtual tour of his new home. So, to begin, in many of the tours and talks that Open Eco Homes run, we put a great deal of focus on the eco part of eco homes, the technical discussions about heat pumps and insulation and so on. And whilst all that's very important and very valuable, ultimately, most of us, when we're building or upgrading a home, we just want to make it comfortable and suitable for our family. So does that conflict with being eco-friendly? Well, Trevor's talk is focusing on the homes part of eco homes. He has built a beautiful new home that meets his requirements primarily. So first and foremost, he's built it to meet the needs of his needs. But he's also managed to make it very energy efficient. So he's going to take us through the process that he went through to achieve that, and the challenges and compromises he made along the way, and ultimately the results he achieved. So with that, Trevor, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So my name's Trevor Purnell. I've always had an interest in design, avid watcher of programs such as Grand Designs. A few years ago, I started visiting self-build projects, including Open Eco Homes. And from that point on, I was hooked. And my only previous building experience has been bathroom and kitchen replacements using subcontractors. I have very limited DIY experience or ability. We started talking about building a house in 2015. Work commenced on the house in April 2019, which completed in December 2020. So I labeled this presentation as how we let the sunshine into our home. I suppose this is in part a reference to one of our key design requirements of having a light-filled and airy home. There's also a reflection on how I felt we differed to many of the other self-builders we've met leading up to us starting the project ourselves. I'm very much a statistics and data-driven person, but I was very aware that when talking to other self-builders, it seemed to me the process of building a house was secondary to a technical challenge of building a sustainable house. I accept that this statement is quite a radical one, given here I am on an Eco Homes broadcast. I hope I've not lost my audience already, but hopefully over the next hour or so I can explain what I mean. So as Chris has already said, the presentation is going to be split into the 4 parts. The first part is roughly 15 minutes of looking at the pre-build phase, followed by questions and answers for that, and then the build and post-build experience, again followed by questions and answers. So a little bit of background first. Since 2003, we have lived in a 1980s 4-bedroom bungalow, which was our home, where we brought up 2 children who've now left and made their own homes elsewhere. The bungalow sits well behind the build line of the road and had a front garden measuring about 38 meters by 36 meters, which lent itself to being used as a building plot. The property sits in a conservation area with listed houses on some of its boundaries. As planning restrictions eased regarding building in conservation areas, informal talks with South Cambs District Council started in 2015, started becoming quite encouraging. The bungalow also has a restricted covenant on it preventing further building on the plot. So we had to negotiate with the covenant holder and agree on a release fee to build a second home. The plot also has a small stream running along the boundary, which was also a consideration. There followed a lengthy and sometimes frustrating period of planning application with South Cambs District Council, but finally we had permission to build a house in a portion of the front garden measuring around about 29 meters by 25 meters, which left access and a small front garden for the original bungalow. So the design was a 255 metre square house with integral packed garage, open plan, kitchen, dining, snug area with a separate sitting room. 4 double bedrooms, 2 with en suites and a family bathroom were on the first floor. Planning restrictions on the roof ridge heights limited us to how high the house could be. So we were limited to a 15-degree pitch house roof. And it also meant we had no loft space. So we have vaulted ceilings upstairs, which is very nice, but obviously no storage. So I have also incorporated in the first floor 2 large storage cupboards. So the key to the successful planning application was our architect, who had experience dealing with planning in conservation areas. So we had a good relationship with our architect, Rob Clark, from AMA in Cambridge. We've seen a number of client briefs produced by self-builders. There were quite often lengthy multi-page documents describing the lives and aspirations of the clients. I often thought, how much of this information could an architect reflect in the design, and how does that get prioritized when the inevitable compromises have to be made? If the document is long, how does the client measure the success or otherwise of the design? So we decided on producing a 2-page document, which we then distilled into a few lines, and these were the lines. So it brings joy, adaptability, light filled, efficiency, sustainability, security, and resellability. And those were the order that were in the document that we gave the architect. So let's break down those elements and see how they're achieved, and importantly, how they run contrary to perhaps some of the eco-homes community thinking. So first of all, brings joy. This could be contentious. It's a hard one to explain, but I've met many self-builders in their homes who take great pride in the gadgets and technologies that help make their houses efficient, but fail to see the place as their sanctuary and shelter. I always try to keep in mind this place was our home above all else. Adaptability. So we all want to stay independent for as long as possible. Who doesn't? So this drove some of the design decisions, which again ran counter to some of the normal eco-design principles. So number 1 was integral garage, which is often seen as a poor design decision, as it's an obvious area of heat loss and it's not airtight. However, our garage can be quickly and cheaply converted to a large ensuite bedroom, has the same level of insulation and airtightness apart from the garage door as the rest of the house. It's connected but isolated from the underfloor heating system and the MVHR. Internal in garage door is a specially made fire door with increased levels of thermal insulation. And this helps again, but it's not necessarily what an eco self-builder would choose to do. And secondly, the design of the house is generally Part M Category 3 compliant, which is all about disability access. And so for that, it allows us to easily convert for wheelchair use, but that increases the space required around all areas of the house. So again, making the house larger, again, goes against the principles of some eco-design theories. Number 3, there's a provision for a lift to be installed, including the rerouting of services away from the planned area, and provision of additional framing and cutaway ceiling sections for the installation. Number 4, the additional load-bearing beams in the ceiling, which allow for installation of hoists in specific rooms. And finally, all the internal walls are non-load bearing, which allow for internal changes of layout. Light filled. There's little doubt that, generally speaking, we prefer light spaces. It's widely accepted good for our well-being, particularly as we get older. And natural light obviously reduces our dependence on lighting. But the compromises there are that we're, even with the very best triple glaze windows, large windows are 5 times less thermally efficient than a reasonably well insulated wall. Bigger windows also give larger areas to make airtight. Solar gain with overheating has to be carefully considered at the design stage. And in addition, we have higher than normal ceilings on the ground and vaulted ceilings on the first floor, which again adds to the feeling of light and joy, but increases the volume to heat. So that's again far from ideal. Of course, the result is increased cost. Efficiency. Firstly, good design comes from a clear brief, and refinement at the design stage. The designer must be able to explain how they have reduced thermal bridging at thresholds and how to construct the numerous junctions. And two, they need to keep in mind that materials are constantly improving, so revisit your specifications before finalizing with your builder. I spotted that Kingspan had just brought out a new type of thermal efficient or higher thermal efficient PIR insulation boards, which had about a 10% increase in their previous iteration, with only a small increase in price, so that those were incorporated. And finally, I made it very clear that only breaches in the frame could be made in the plant room area, and only with me being there. There was one contractor who disagreed with this line, and he was replaced. And just in addition, there's no better way to monitor the quality of the build than to regularly visit the site, particularly at the end of the day, and check and repair any areas of poor taping, backfill any punctures in the shell, and keep the place generally tidy. So sustainability. So how do we measure that? No doubt everyone here has got some views on that, and I'd be interested to hear your own views actually in the questions and answers. So some who think that we need to look at using natural materials, ideally locally sourced, and that I fully appreciate that view. But at the other end of the scale, you might argue that energy saving over the lifetime of a house could outweigh all the other considerations. And for me, that was the sort of area that I occupied. So I used the best man-made insulation I could, used timber frame manufacturer, used Swedish wood that was environmentally managed. I used aluminium on the roof, and the windows and doors were also made from aluminium and wood, which are easily recyclable. But on the other hand, the windows and doors were made in Austria because their performance couldn't be matched by any UK-based company. So I did my best, and that's, again, a personal choice. So the security, so outside this real area of interest for us, but it was on the list. So just to say that it's an easy thing to make a new house secure using latest physical and detection devices, and that's what we did for peace of mind. And then the final thing on the list is resellability. And to those keen to incorporate green technologies, having bespoke and specialized kit is part of our solution to providing an efficient house. But when you come to sell your property, some of this can be seen as overly complicated and deter buyers. For example, we're in an all-electric house. It seems that gas is on the way out. Government legislation is pointing the way, but government legislation is not always right and can change. I'm sure we can all remember the drive for us all to drive diesel cars, which obviously is no longer the case. So though we only have electric in the house, we had to reroute the gas supply to the bungalow around the site, and for an additional few £100, we had the gas supply brought to a meter on the side of our build. And in addition, we fitted internal gas pipes for a boiler installation and for a gas hob. We have no intention of using this, but it's there just in case. You know, we never know. Hydrogen might be the answer further down the line, with be able to produce that in a green way. And the other thing I bear in mind is that I've been to visit a house which had the owner had made a number of Raspberry Pi devices controlling all sorts of things within the house. And he took great delight in showing me, and it was quite impressive that he'd done this sort of out of a kit form, rather than using off-the-shelf type devices. But I could only think that if he was to ever to move out of his house and the new owner was to go in, that using those control systems might prove quite difficult for the new owner if he didn't really understand how it was all set up. So in summary, for the first part, the general principle was that although I wanted the most efficient house for the least amount of money, on analysis, this efficiency requirement came down to the list, came down the list somewhat, the efficiency side. So what I do have is still a very efficient house, but I'm happy to say that as far as I'm concerned, the compromises I've made are ones that are livable with, and ones that give us a good level of efficiency. So I'll break here and let Chris take over and to start fielding any questions on the first half. Thanks, Chris.
Well, hopefully, Nicole, I don't know. There's only one question in the comments at the moment, but so did your architect try to, or any of your people advising you, try to push you in a certain direction? I mean, you feel
the architect we chose actually wasn't really that familiar with building ultra efficient houses, which perhaps in hindsight was was something that we perhaps should have thought more about at that stage, because our intention was always to build an efficient house, but our main concern was to actually get the thing through planning, and that was the thing that came up the highest on our list for choosing an architect at the stage, was someone who had a fair amount of success with planning in the conservation area. So the architect we chose had already got planning permission and had built some houses within the village, within the same conservation area. So that was one of these big pluses. And also, we obviously were impressed by their general designing ethos, which was aligned to what the sort of thing we were looking for.
okay.
Hannah's got a question. So Hannah asked, you said it was timber construction. Did you consider using SIPs?
We did. And we looked at a couple of SIP companies. The issue we had is that in order to maximize the space within the plot, which was relatively tight, we had to try and squeeze as much insulation in as possible. And there was, for a comparison for thermal efficiency against the depth of walls, the construction we chose was marginally better. I mean, we're not talking about much, but it was a little bit better. But also the biggest thing was that the roof was quite a complex roof, again, because of the layer of the restrictions we had on the site. And we couldn't get a SIP manufacturer to offer us a SIP roof as well. So we would have to have had a hand cut roof, which is what we ended up having to support the roof. So we did consider it, but in the end, it wasn't possible. It wasn't the most straightforward option.
Ian also has a question about. Can you quickly just explain what SIPs are? So structurally insulated panels. I mean, yeah, different versions they come in.
Yeah, I mean the what we had wasn't too far off a SIP, to be honest. It was the you'll see in one of the later pictures the sections of the building that are made in a factory and then transported to sites. So there's not a huge amount of difference, but SIPs generally have some sort of OSB board on either side to form an enclosure where the insulation is pumped into, whereas ours was only a solid on one side with an open internal area. So the difference in the way it's done is not that great, but the SIPs are just a sandwich of boards with insulation in the center.
That's very useful to know. Ian asks, it's early in your occupancy of your home, so what metrics are you using to measure efficiency, kilowatt hours per square meter per annum, for example? How are you going about that?
Well, maybe Ian wants to listen into the second half where that's covered. But yeah, we
save that for the second half.
but yes, but I based it on obviously the power we're using, and we have some fairly reasonable metrics that we've got to measure up against a yardstick against other data such as passive house type performances.
Okay, well, there are no more questions in the chat, so I'd like to invite, if anyone's got any quick questions, we've got probably just a few minutes that we can field some very quick questions. Otherwise, I will ask Trevor to continue with part 2. So any quick questions, any raised hands for a quick question? No. Okay. I think we're happy to continue with part 2. Thank you, Trevor.
So I'm going to play a 4-minute video clip here of some of the house and give some commentary, and then the presentation will follow. So here we are coming through the front door into the hall area. You can see it's a little bit wider than perhaps normal. It's all part of this adaptability requirement for ease of access. The ceilings are also a bit higher than normal. They're 2.6 meters rather than the standard 2.4, giving us that sort of a little bit extra light and airiness that we were after. So moving into the utility room and then to the plant room, we can see some of the sort of main features of the eco stuff in the house. So at the top there is the inverter. It's a solar edge inverter which feeds from the panels on the roof into the control unit there from Give Energy, and below it the battery, which is a 8.4 kilowatt hour battery. System works pretty well and is monitored by a very good app, and we just enjoy using that free power. So this is the control unit for the air source heat pump, which is a NEEB system, and again it's a very straightforward control system on that. So ducting going into the MVHR system. At the front, that white panel comes off for access to filters. They need to be just vacuumed clean about once every 4 to 6 months, so very straightforward maintenance. And then below it, in the far corner, is a water softener. Then you've got the blue expansion tank sitting on the 100 litre buffer tank, which is for the underfloor heating. As we draw back, you can see the 400 litre buffer tank for the domestic hot water with an expansion tank above it. And then just outside of this room is the air source heat pump, which sits below the kitchen window. So NEEB F2040 with a 12 kilowatt nominal output. And then above it, you can see there's a sensor on the wall, which is for the weather compensations, which is all part of the same system. So this sits, there's a minimum distance from the wall for this particular system. It has to be a minimum of 6 inches away, which is about 8 or 9 inches to allow airflow around it. See the external boxes there for the gas and electric, but obviously only the gas outside, the only electric is used within the house. And then inside again, slightly tight in the plant room, so we overspill into the utility room some of the electrics. So those modules are for the lights for the main open plan area with their associated Wi-Fi system. And then a double bank of consumer board there, a lot more electrical circuits with being a pure electric house. Then below the smaller consumer board there, which is associated with the emergency power supply, which is part of the advantages of having a battery, so that we can choose to have a percentage of the battery in reserve should we get a power supply interruption. So just a quick look at the controls for the heating. So it's just a standard controller. The house is zoned, and these just control each zone. And then to the right of it, it's just part of the Rayco lighting system to replace a bank of 12 switches, which is what we had in this area, 12 separate lighting circuits. So nice high ceilings, lots of light coming through large windows, and then this big skylight as well. So we sort of broke this area up with some furniture to make it a little bit more homely. And finally, in the landing upstairs, 2 large Velux windows. They're electrically operated, and they obviously bring in a lot of light into the landing area, and then it through down into the hall. but also in the summer, they allow us to open up and ventilate the house very effectively, particularly overnight, just so that we can manage any overheating. So continue with the slides then. So against the advice of our architect, we decided not to appoint a main contractor, which was a risky decision given our lack of experience and the fact that my job took me out of contact during the working day. In addition, this is quite a complex build, which again ran against advice from the wise. However, I wanted to be more than a client, and I was interested in learning more about house building. We did appoint a project manager to oversee the house build up to the weatherproofing stage, though. So the initial work started in March 2019, which was to reconfigure the drive to the bungalow and build a retaining wall. We should stay at this stage that we didn't go a whole hog on this, and that we, I was all for just getting an old caravan and sticking it on the site and living out on that. But my wife was very insistent we stayed in the bungalow throughout the build. So we did have that as an advantage. So the groundworkers returned in May to start the foundations. We got off to a great start with good conditions, very skilled team. One thing to bear in mind for the timber frame is the tolerances are very tight in terms of constructing the base for the timber frame. Very small tolerances in terms of both dimensions of each of the sections of the foundation, and also for the level across the entire site. So while this was going on, the timber frame was being constructed, and here it is ready for delivery from Biggleswade. So the speed that a prefabricated house goes up is astonishing. No matter how many times you see it on TV, just seeing it grow in front of your eyes is something I'll never forget. But this does mean that decisions can't wait. Any changes are much, much more difficult to make. Materials get used up at an alarming rate as well. But so you have to get really ahead of the project from the very start. For an initial £1,260, we had 18mm sarking board fitted to the top of the trusses. So this is unusual in England. It's more common in Scotland, but it gives us greater thermal protection. It really aided the fitting of the insulation from underneath. It increases sound insulation and stiffen the frame. So doors and windows, which have a very long lead time, were ordered knowing that the frame was being made to very tight tolerances. So they were delivered very early on in the build, and we were weather tight and secure in week 5. The build went well, and I generally enjoyed it, and most of the subcontractors who were recommended by our project manager were very good. We're on target to finish by June 2020, and then, of course, COVID hit. And this had various consequences. Firstly, I took early retirement, which allowed me to become a full-time project manager. So after initial site shutdown, we reopened in accordance with government guidance. However, we did limit to only one trade on site at any time. Sourcing materials was probably the most difficult part of the operation now, and long lead times for any materials. So the completion date of the build was delayed from June until December. Also, there was cost implications. We used up the remaining contingency plus a further £9,000. So here we have the calculated values of the insulation we installed. So key in here is the internal layer, 15mm layer of insulation, which went in the roof on the first floor and on all the walls. So that continuous layer really copes with a lot with the any thermal bridging within the structure. Helps also obviously with air tightness as well. So as far as air tightness is concerned, the first test, which was booked some weeks in advance, occurred on a really windy day. In addition, due to sickness of the carpenter, the internal window sills weren't fitted, but nonetheless, the result was really good. But the guy who did the test was so impressed, and was disappointed on my behalf for the fact that the windowsills weren't fitted and that it was a windy day, that he offered to come back a few weeks later free of charge to retest. So once the work was done internally, he came back and the second test came obviously even better. So how does the experience measure up to expectation? So these are the major energy consuming systems we've got installed. So firstly, the PV panels, LG panels on the roof, they're on two separate elevations, pointing southeast and southwest, which maximizes the power throughout the day as the sun goes around. So the output of that is rated at 5.4 kilowatts peak. So the solar edge inverter, as you saw earlier on, is linked to a Give Energy battery within the plant room, and then the air source heat pump with 12 kilowatts supply, which I think in common with a lot of people is probably larger than we need. But it was recommended that we go for an 8 kilowatt unit. But I made allowances for the fact that we maybe one day convert the garage to a living space. So we went up to the next size unit. So that's partly my requirements, but even so, I think it's probably a bigger unit than we need. LED lights fitted throughout, and the MVHR system extracts around about 90% of the energy in all of the air that's extracted from the wet areas. So at the time of before build, it was calculated the energy use of the house would be around about 7 kilowatt hours per annum. And the year leading up to the 1st of October of this year, we've actually used 7,090. So pretty close, but I'm determined in the next 12 months, we'll get that below 7,000. So you see here that battery, the PV panels and the battery play a big part in our energy management. So roughly half of it comes from the roof, and 45% of what we're able to use is via the battery. And then we do export about 1,750 back to the grid. We're virtually independent of the grid between mid-April to mid-October. In terms of how we use the house, Monday to Friday, it's just two of us. We're both home, retired. We have the temperature set downstairs at 21 degrees and upstairs at 18 degrees. Although this temperature differentials, it's not really that easy to maintain because of the MVHR effect of the air sort of circulating around the house. We have weekend visitors and we entertain a fair bit. So we use the house very well. So the power use there is reflective of quite a high occupancy rate, given that there's only two of us. But let's say we have people visit over the weekends. As far as the PV and battery is concerned, initially the calculated payback was somewhere in the region of 12 years, which on economic grounds didn't really support the decision that much. But we felt it was the right thing to do. So once we had the VAT returned to us, which is part of the process after you get your completion certificate, we decided to use some of that money to fit the system. So that was fitted last July. Obviously, with the increased cost of energy, that payback is probably now in the region of 5 to 6 years, assuming that the present energy prices remain around about the same. So we use Octopus Energy, who offer a smart energy guarantee tariff to offset the charges. They offer better deals if you have electric car, and that's something that we might consider getting in due course. So here, in terms of trying to prepare the ground to do the comparison between us and a passive house, I've just had to make a fairly crude assumptions here to try and calculate what our energy use is for space heating. So as we already said, our annual consumption is 7,090 kilowatt hours. Our livable area is 231 square meters, which excludes the garage. So I've taken our summer months consumption, which obviously doesn't include space heating, around about 320 per month, and then got to an annual figure and taken that off from that original 7,090 to give us an estimated space heating consumption of 3,250 kilowatt hours, which works out at 14 kilowatt hours per square meter. So looking at some of the sort of bigger metrics for a passive house, you can see that in terms of primary energy renewable demand, this is a little bit difficult to tell, to be honest. We're losing around about half of what we use. It comes off the roof. The rest comes from Octopus, which generally speaking use renewable energies as much as possible. But I think we would, if I was able to get some accurate figures, be well within that allowance for passive house use. So as far as space heating is concerned, again, based on those figures I showed on the previous slide, we come within the passive house criteria. Space cooling, we don't have any air conditioning or any other use to keep the house cool. So we are well within that, and air tightness is just a little bit out, marginally out. So that's where we fall foul. Summer overheating, where we try to look at 10% of the days only above 25 degrees Celsius. But we obviously had a hot summer, and we had a few days where it was above 25 degrees, but nowhere near sort of 10%. So, but it's not measured, so I can't be, in all honesty, say that we're within that criteria. But my own feelings are we are. So, from the raw data and some assumptions, we're pretty close to passive house in terms of performance, which hopefully answers Ian's question from the midterm break and questions and answers. So as far as the cost is concerned, so after the VAT was refunded, the total spend was £455,100, which for a 255 square metre house works out at an average of £1,785. And the sort of perceived wisdom or rule of thumb that was in place at the time of our build was for a quality house would cost around about £2,000 per square metre. So even though we incorporated some extras, particularly a lot of extra material to make the house airtight and thermally efficient, it came well under what you might consider a good quality house build costs. So finally, so what do I mean by at the start when I suggested that many eco home self builders are driven more by data and the desire to reach targets than to build a home? Well, I think we've had to broaden the appeal of building really good and efficient houses. A limited number of people who will accept the compromises that have to be made to build textbook eco homes. And this reduces the speed of the rollout of efficient homes that appeal to the mass market. It also means that big developers can ignore the obvious need to build better homes, as the majority of the public are confused and excluded from what's possible. I think it's straightforward to build a home that is easy to live in and adaptable for our future, but with very high levels of efficiency. The contractors I used were normal, everyday tradespeople without specialist knowledge, but were willing to be guided and adopt better practice. Building an efficient house is not expensive. As an eco-build community, we have to start generating interest and knowledge without turning off the majority of homeowners, buyers, and builders. Clearly, government have to lead with updating building regulations. However, the self-build community, particularly the element pushing for eco-building, have to bring more daylight into their world and not scare off the people looking in. So that concludes what I've got to say about our build. I'd like to express my thanks to those at Open Econ Homes for their help, especially for Alana, Nicole, and Chris, who helped me with this presentation. So over to you, Chris, for any questions and answers.
I've got one to kick off, and then there are some others in the chat which Nicole will cover. But did you have to spend? How much time did you spend managing that yourself, as opposed to, you said you took a decision to let,
Well,
not to
hindsight,
employ.
it was serendipitous. I mean, it's very fortunate timing, because, as I say, we only had a project manager on board until we were watertight, which happened quite early, and it would have been a struggle, to be honest, to have done it in the time frame I thought was possible. We gave ourselves just over a year, and I think, and obviously that was affected by COVID, which wasn't in the original plan. But it took over my life, and my friends and relatives will attest to the fact that that's all I talked about and all I thought about for at least the year before the start and throughout the whole period. And so I became the world's most boring person, I think. So you can't underestimate how much time and energy and headspace it takes to try and get this done. And that goes for all house building, not just really efficient house building. I think I don't think there's anyone who would say otherwise. Yeah.
And regarding efficiency, so I think Ian had a question. Would you like to unmute Ian, and then we can sort of follow up?
Hi, Trevor.
Hello.
Let me put my video on as well. Just if it helps.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Hi. First of all, fantastic. Really, really good. And
I recognise you. I watched your video a couple of days ago.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen your feedback on that, but I'd be obviously pleased to hear that now or later.
Okay.
So basically, similar situation really. We generate off the roof. We have a heat pump, and we are doing what we can to reduce energy per square meter. And one of the challenges, of course, is the seasonality of the PV. And I noticed that about a third of your generation off the roof is going back into the system, which of course is a good thing because it helps other people. Have you had any, by the way, you've been extremely busy. I know you've probably just come up for air, but have you had any thoughts on how you can reduce that 1700 kilowatt hours?
Well, I suppose, as I sort of alluded to, there's a possibility that we might, in the near future, buy an EV car, which would take that. But obviously, we're only looking at in the summer season, effectively.
Yep.
Other than well, actually, there isn't a solution, because I can't see the SCG payments becoming more generous. What I do say, and one of the things that you brought out in your presentation and others as well, is this drive towards grid balancing. So I can see the offsets, as it were, the offset on the cost of me giving that a very reduced rate into the grid, 1700 kilowatts of power every year, offset by the fact that in the winter season I can be part of a grid balancing system whereby I can get cheaper rates then, or payments even, to help with that. So I see it sort of as energy usage becoming more of a community-based network system whereby we're feeding into each other's systems.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask a follow-up, Chris? Is that okay?
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
Yeah. I noticed that on the sorry, it's a very specific point, but on the hot water tank that's attached to the heat pump, had you looked at the Mixergy hot water tank, which would give you some, optionality to use some of that PV to heat the water in the summer?
So it was broken, but from my understand, another type of tank. I didn't catch what it was.
Yeah. Again, we probably don't want to get into the specific, and you might say it's too late now because my tank's adequate and working well, and it's obviously run off the heat pump. But there are options to look at direct heating through the PV, and a product like Mixergy is a hot water tank. And I wondered if your air source heat pump people had suggested some of that as part of their proposal.
Okay. There was an option actually to buy a more something that had more functionality. And I think it's
Yeah.
parts along those lines that you're discussing. We did look at it, and maybe it's a decision I live to regret. But my thought at the time was that we were trying to not reduce the cost because obviously there was an expense there. But I think I'm not entirely sure. Looking back as to why specifically we dismissed a more.
By the way,
yeah.
By the way, you should have no regrets. It's an extraordinary, excellent project. So I was just curious.
No. I do remember a conversation, and one of the trade shows that we went to, there was a company that had these tanks that you were talking about, and we took away the literature and read it, and we discussed it with New Heat, which were the company we used to source the air source heat pump, the underfloor heating. So that they had that as part of their offer, and it was discussed with them, but we obviously dismissed it for various reasons.
Okay, thank you.
So I think Chris has got a general question on sort of spending extra for energy efficiency, and then I'd like to follow on with Sue Roberts' question.
So
Chris.
yeah, I mean, I guess, Trevor, the claim you seem to be making is that you didn't have to spend extra to achieve what you've achieved in terms of the energy efficiency. Do you sort of really feel that that is the case? I know that you had an estimate in mind per meter when you went into the project, and you've done well against that, and that's obviously great. But are you really saying that this has turned out cheaper than a conventional house of a similar spec?
No, probably not, actually. I think if I had done this and just built to building regulations, then I think we could have produced a lot less for a lot less money. Well, without a doubt, because obviously most of the things we put in were well above building regs. We wouldn't have necessarily, if we were just doing it purely for profit, we wouldn't have put an MVHR or a air source heat pump. It would have been very much a standard house. So what I'm suggesting is that it's a lot of money. I'm not saying that £400,000 is inconsequential. It's a huge amount of money, but in the context of building a new house, so a 4-bedroom house, it's not impossible to incorporate some reasonably good bits of kit in terms of fabric of the house and the kit within it, without being overly expensive and beyond the reach of a lot of people. I mean, one of the things that we were very wary of is we wanted to use well-proven bits of kit. So, all of the individual pieces like the MVHR, air source heat pump, they're not new, cutting edge. It's all been around for a long time. So we didn't want to be a test lab, but equally it's something that wouldn't find on a normal built house. Yeah.
Over to Sue Roberts.
Yes. Are you going to ask the question, or shall I?
You go ahead. It's nice to hear your voice.
Okay. I just wonder whether you had any problems with building regs in relation to the amount of window that you have in your house. You call it a light field house, and you've got a lot of window. I'm extending and retrofitting my house, and have been told by the architect that I'll not be allowed as much window as I had hoped for, and that's for energy efficiency reasons. I think that may possibly be a very new regulation. I can only have as much, just about as much window as I already have got in the extension that I'm building. And that's because they won't allow that much window now, because windows lose heat. So I just wonder whether you had any issues with that. It was a while ago when you did yours, I know.
Yes, there was some. We did discuss this with the architect, and he went away and did the calculations, and we fell below it. And I think it was a mixture of it's not, they didn't just calculate it based on the leakage through the windows. It was taking the whole fabric of the building. So, you know, if you have really well insulated walls, it offsets having a larger window. Even a triple glazed window, as I say, is you know 5 times or more less efficient than a normal wall. So it was a case of playing one part of the house off against the other to choose a house that was well within the tolerances.
Okay. It may be that it is just a new rule, but yes, yes, I know the architects having to do quite careful calculations about the size of the windows, even though they're going to be triple glazed and, you know, the walls are going to be insulated. I think it's a new rule. I don't know whether anybody else knows anything about that, but yeah.
And for your build, are they just taking the extension as a standalone, or are they looking at the older part of the house in the calculations to which will bring down your average for the extension?
I think the extension will be a standalone, actually, because the original part of the house is an old Victorian house with sash windows, and the extension is going to be quite different and quite new. So yeah, I think it's going to be treated quite separately.
Right.
But the whole house I'm having insulated, which is going to cost a fortune. But yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And I think Janet wanted to ask about all the time you spent project managing. Janet.
Hi. Yeah, we've got the wrong name. It's Claire here.
Sorry.
I was interested in your per square metre estimated cost, and it's a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but a bit serious. Did you do a second calculation if you paid yourself the going rate for the year or however much worth of time you put in it? And I wonder whether you would have reached the 2,000 per square metre or whatever it was.
I think you're probably right there, actually. No, I didn't. I didn't put in my time at all. I wouldn't know how to begin to estimate the hours I've spent. So it's a very good question. I think probably, and obviously it also depends on how you value your time. I don't know. A good question. I might go away one day and try and figure that out and come back. But yeah, it would obviously have a big effect. Or paying someone else to do it. Yeah, we did have estimates for a fully project managed house, and rather than the 12,000 which we paid up to the weather tight, the full project. Well, they varied in estimates, but anywhere from about 30 to 45,000. So that was the sort of difference in having a fully managed up to sort of turnkey point.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I have a general question. I mean, it's an absolutely superb build and really, really beautiful. What are the 3 takeaways you would say from this enormous project and this enormous process?
Well, actually, that is a very good segue into the beautifully prepared booklet that you have produced, Nicole, with from my questionnaire. And it did actually, part of the questionnaire that you used to form that booklet actually talked about what those things were. And I'm just frantically trying to find it now. But one of the biggest things, and I know it's a really boring thing, is to have a very good system for dealing with estimates, quotes, changes that you're very, very aware of from the very start, because it's too late once the project starts. So you will get overwhelmed with this information because we, like in common with every other probably self-builder, as a project goes along, you'll make little changes which to you is nothing, and in terms of what the cost is to the project, not necessarily break a huge amount, but it generates another quote, so I would say make sure you've got a system of paperwork which can deal with quotes, invoices, payments to make sure you paid them. And at the end of all this, you have to produce quite a detailed document to HMRC to reclaim your VAT. So you need all of the receipts and itemized on their paperwork. So in the end, it saves you a lot of time.
And to clarify, the reason you can reclaim VAT is because it's a new build and it's not renovation. That's
correct. Yes. Yeah. So I'm trying to find on this bit of paper that I supplied to you the other key points. But it really, I mentioned it in the build there, in the brief, is I was on site virtually all the time, so I was able to control what was going on and make sure things were done to what I wanted. But obviously for a lot of people that won't be possible. But a regular visits to the site, and even to the point of just keeping the place tidy, because the amount of stuff that's generated on site, waste and rubbish, someone has to clear it away. So it's either got to be you, or you're paying a tradesperson who's on £200 a day or plus to sweep the floor, which is really not using them to their best. So that would be another point. The others, I would say, just refer to the booklet which goes along with this presentation, because that has a couple of other thoughts that I came out with, but I can't put my finger on now.
How have you? I mean, has living in this beautiful creation of yours, has it changed the way you live?
I think we're more aware of that. One of the things about a house like this is it will cool down and stay cool for longer. So you have to anticipate. So when we go away on a holiday, we know that the house will cool down when we put it on the holiday setting. So we'll put the heating on, 2 or 3 days ahead of our return. Particularly it's over the winter time, because we know that's the time it'll take the fabric to sort of warm up beyond the minimum setting. So a little bit more anticipation, and I'm still actually following some of the other Eco Home briefings this season. I'm starting to sort of play a little bit more with things like flow temperatures on the underfloor heating system, which I've not really had much cause to adjust up to now, but I'm starting to do that. So I'm learning a little bit more about how that works. But again, it takes a long time, several days for any adjustment that you make to show. And then, of course, the conditions outside change in terms of whether it gets colder or warmer. So that's more difficult. So you have to be a little bit more empathetic towards the house, and the way that it operates isn't so instantaneous as you might be used to with a normal radiator. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Chris now for the closing session.
Yeah, if I can wrap up, let me check I'm on. Yeah, so thank you very much, Trevor, for a fantastic, interesting tour around your house and the thinking that you put into it. And, my takeaway from all of this is, particularly if you put a lot of careful design and attention to the detail of the way it was constructed and planned, and you can have it all. You can have the house that you want and also make it very energy efficient. And a lot of that is down, I think, to the planning and the effort you put in with the people, on a daily basis while you were building it and planning it. So thank you very much for showing us around. Thank you, Nicole, for managing the questions and looking after people, and thank you to everybody else who contributed today.
So now, with the formal section completed, does anyone else have any follow-up questions they'd like to ask?
Hi, Nicole, it's Ian.
Hi, Ian.
I just wondered if I could just make a comment, that's all.
Yes, of course.
Trevor, it's regarding octopus. I noted you were on octopus. I say this because I've had experience of this. There is partly because octopus themselves say this, there's a view that one can't get on you mentioned that there are other tariffs available that may be of interest to you in the future, particularly if you have an electric car. Octopus are pushing heat pumps significantly, and from experience, I can confirm that if you were to contact them and explain that you have a heat pump and that you're looking to use you might decide you don't want to, by the way, and that's fine. This is input. One of their time of use tariffs, they will look at that favorably.
Okay.
There is a preconception that one has to have an EV car, partly because they call many of their tariffs go.
Yeah.
But they also want to facilitate a use of home heating that uses low carbon, and often low carbon during the 24-hour cycle is at the same time that the price is low.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the statistics, but I guess I'm just saying, I'm just as an observation, you might find that you can try and move that forward. Of course, it's not easy at the moment because all their customer-facing people are dealing, understandably, with a lot of problems that people are experiencing on fuel poverty. But I can put it in the chat, but there is a chief technologist, a chap called Phil Steele, that might be able to facilitate some form of, if you decide you want to move to something else. It would require, of course, you being on a SMETS 2 meter that allows them to track the half-hour time of use consumption numbers.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have SMETS 2, so that shouldn't be an issue. I mean, I as you say, I've spoken to the helpline and explained what we've got, and they didn't have anything else on offer. But it sounds like you say that it's not necessarily a widely held or widely known.
I think they're trying to find a mechanism through this. They clearly. Well, I would just ask. It might be worth pursuing that. I can put it in. I can send you a direct message with his contact details. They've set up a heat pump academy. They're running a significant number of trials to reduce costs of heat pumps to make them more affordable for homes, and as part of that, they have certainly. I've just installed the Tepio, the Zeb Tepio, in another project I'm working on, and that's attracted the tariff.
Right.
And then the related question is: are you familiar with some of the other excellent, easy-to-use apps for generations on the back of the API? And again, this isn't me using a Raspberry Pi. This is all on the market, easily available.
I have nothing against Raspberry Pis. I hope I didn't come across as anti-Raspberry Pi.
I was not implying that. I understand exactly your point about one needs to be cognizant of the marketability for future. And frankly, you probably don't want to spend all your time like I don't want to spend my time. You want easy to use apps and things. So we distributed following last week's talk where my data came from and the applications and the websites. And again, those come through simply developers using the API that Octopus kindly make available for your own personal home consumption.
How did the house perform during the heat wave this year, Trevor?
Well, surprisingly well, and that was an issue during the design stage. And at the back there, where you saw that big slider window, one of the things we did was to have a canopy. It wasn't perhaps very visible on the short clip, but there's a canopy that extends out by it's about 2.5 meters, which gives a shading for most of the windows on the south, certainly from the slider, and really for the French windows to the right of it as well. So that's obviously proved successful. And during those, we had a period where we had 3 really hot days, but very hot overnight. And by the third night, it was uncomfortable. But I think most people were. I mean, regardless of unless you had air conditioning. So it was warm overnight, and then obviously things cool off. But where you've got some really hot days and a cooler night, the house is very good at its ventilation system. It's opening up these. We've got another Velux window in the ensuite bathroom, so opening those 3 windows upstairs and then 1 or 2 windows downstairs, it sort of creates a chimney effect.
Yes.
And obviously the MVHR is not affecting those at that period, but it's very good at purging the heat from the house, and it became quite easily manageable, to be honest. So it was okay, and we looked at buying some film to put on the windows because they're just standard windows, but in the end we decided against it because we felt that actually wasn't worthwhile just for for this last summer. Just for a few days it affected us.
Yes.
And,
do you remember what was the highest temperature, the highest internal temperature during the heat wave for you?
Well, I think probably about 25 to 26.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's superb.
Yeah. I might be a bit out there, but there was still quite a big difference. But for instance, Chris has got a thatched cottage with very thick walls, and I'm sure that his internal temperatures were a lot less. But it wasn't too bad. And in fact, I suppose one of the problems with the MVHR system is for the house to be ventilated and for fresh air, you're taking in ambient air from outside.
Yes.
And we experimented with turning that off during the daytime to stop that sort of hot air coming in.
Yeah.
We didn't really come to any conclusions as to whether that was an improvement or not. But we'll obviously over the next few years look at it.
Yes.
You can use your diving equipment, can you?
But, why didn't I think of that?